The man who discovered America. Who was he really? A genius, a dreamer, or a madman? He was born without a title, without wealth, without power. And yet, he managed to break through the wall of the impossible. One idea would not let him go. It kept him afloat when the world laughed in his face, and one mistake opened new lands. But that same mistake, in the end, took everything from him. This is the story of a man whose faith was stronger than reality. The story of Christopher Columbus. And to understand who he truly was, let's go back to the beginning, to the place where a boy first heard the call of the sea. Genoa, 1451. Christopher Columbus was born into the family of a weaver. His family was poor, and from childhood he had to work and help his father. But the boy's eyes were always drawn to the sea. At the ports, where ships from all over the Mediterranean arrived, he would spend hours listening to sailors' stories about storms, pirates, and faraway lands where the sun always shined. As a teenager, he worked on trading ships. He helped on voyages, learned from navigators, and soon realized the sea was not just work. It was his destiny. Columbus studied geography, astronomy, and the works of ancient scholars on his own. The world on the page pulled him just as strongly as the waves of the ocean. At 20, he faced his first serious trial. His ship was attacked by pirates near Portugal. He barely survived, swimming to shore. And this situation only made him stronger. The sea became his true home. Later he moved to Lisbon, the center of European sea trade. There he met the best mapmakers, sailors, and astronomers of his time. And fate had more in store. A meeting with the daughter of a navigator, who would soon become his wife. Now he had access to rare maps and maritime knowledge. It was then that the thought first appeared in his mind. The thought that would change everything. What if you could reach Asia by sailing the other way? In the 15th century, the East seemed like a land of wonders to Europeans. Gold, silk, spices. But the way there was long and dangerous. Sailors had to go around Africa, and the land routes were controlled by the Ottoman Empire. Columbus was obsessed with one idea. What if the route could be shorter? His calculations looked like madness. Scholars said, "He is wrong." They believed the distance was much greater than Columbus thought, and they were right. But Columbus's stubbornness was stronger than logic. He didn't see the impossible. He only saw the goal. Years went by. He wrote proposals, pleaded with merchants, unfolded his maps and dreams before anyone who would listen. Yet every door seemed to close. In Portugal they laughed. In Genoa they turned him away. Even England refused to believe. So he carried his vision across borders, until he reached Spain, a country at war where the crown had no time for dreamers. Once again, Columbus was told to wait, and he did, for years. He lived in poverty, wandered from monastery to monastery, trying to gain the support of influential monks. Sometimes it seemed everything was falling apart. Yet in those years, he learned how to convince people. He spoke not only about trade routes, but also about spreading Christianity to new lands. His dream turned from madness into a vision, with gold, glory, and faith. When Spain finally won the war, the spirit of the kingdom changed. Now the country wanted new horizons, and Queen Isabella made a decision. She agreed to give Columbus what he had been fighting for all these years: ships, a crew, and the right to search for his western route. The dream that had seemed buried forever suddenly had a chance at life. 1492. Columbus receives 3 ships: the Niña, the Pinta, and the flagship, the Santa Maria. The crew were simple sailors, many of whom believed they were sailing into the void. August. The ships leave the port. From this moment begins the voyage that will change the world. The first weeks were full of hope. The sea was calm, the winds favorable. But the farther west they went, the stronger the fear grew. No one had ever sailed this far. The sailors whispered, "We are heading to the edge of the world." Days dragged on painfully. Water spoiled. Compasses acted strangely, and men started to complain. Each morning the captain heard louder voices. "Turn back, or we will all die." But Columbus stayed unshaken. He gave his men confidence, even as he himself balanced between hope and despair. Every night he stared at the horizon, as if trying to see land with the force of his eyes. And then, October. At dawn, a sailor shouted, "Land!" Before them appeared an island, green and bright under the sun. They thought they had reached Asia. In truth, they were standing at the gates of a completely new world. The island they landed on was part of the Bahamas, but Columbus was sure this was Asia. He called the locals Los Indios, Indians, believing he had reached India. For the crew, it was a miracle. Palm trees, warm seas, people with bronze skin who greeted them with curiosity, not fear. The islanders brought food, gifts, not realizing the visitors came in search of gold and power. Columbus saw destiny in this. He believed he had found the doors to the richest lands of the East. What was ordinary for the locals looked like the promise of endless treasures to the Europeans. Here began the first friendships and the first misunderstandings. To Columbus, it was only the beginning. In his reports, he wrote that he had found the coasts of Asia rich with gold. In truth, he had no idea. He was standing on the edge of a new continent, a mistake that would change everything. On his second voyage, Columbus returned not as a dreamer, but as an admiral. With 17 ships and over 1,000 colonists, this was no longer a journey of discovery. It was an expedition of conquest. The goal was no longer to find new lands, but to claim them. From the New World, he brought not only exotic birds, fabrics, and gold. He also brought the first slaves, native people whom he presented as a workforce for colonies. For the Spanish court, this was proof. The New World could be not only discovered, but exploited. In Seville and Barcelona, he was welcomed as a hero. Crowds admired the wonders from overseas, and even small amounts of gold excited imaginations. Columbus was called the Admiral of the Ocean, the man who gave Spain a new continent. But the glory soon began to crack. Reports of hunger, rebellion, and cruelty reached the crown. Natives resisted the invaders. On the surface, it was the age of discovery. Inside, it was the start of what would one day destroy Columbus's reputation. Columbus's third voyage became a turning point. In 1498, he reached the shores of South America, the mouth of the Orinoco River. The rivers were so vast that he wrote, "This is not an island. This is a continent." Yet even then, he believed Asia was near. Even faced with a new world, he did not want to give up his idea. Meanwhile, tension was growing in the colonies. Settlers complained of hunger, disorder, and Columbus's harsh rule. Rumors reached Spain that the admiral ruled like a tyrant. Finally, the crown intervened. Columbus was arrested and brought back to Spain in chains. For most men, this would have been the end. But Columbus convinced the monarchs to give him one last chance. And so began his fourth and final voyage. Now he no longer sought gold for glory. He desperately hoped to find a sea route to India, to prove that all his years of struggle had meant something. He sailed along Central America, faced storms, sickness, the loss of ships, but the passage to Asia was never found. When he returned, he was no longer a hero, but a man pushed aside. His name was still known, but his power and trust were gone. With each passing day, his star faded. In his last years, Columbus found himself in a strange position. He had opened new lands, but never understood their scale. He believed until the end he had reached Asia. For him, America was only islands on the way to the east. After the fourth voyage, he lived in Spain, almost forgotten. Illness consumed him: gout, arthritis, fever. Once he stood before the king in golden clothes, now he could barely walk. But Columbus never stopped writing letters to the monarchs, demanding his promised titles and wealth. He fought to the end, not with the ocean, but with people. And in this, he remained the same man who once dared to sail into the unknown, stubborn and more sure of himself than anyone else. In 1506, in Valladolid, Christopher Columbus died, not as a national hero, but as a man overtaken by time. Yet his discovery changed the world forever. After him, Europeans no longer saw the ocean as a barrier. It became a road to new lands, new wealth, new tragedies. And even though Columbus never realized what he had discovered, it was his faith that pushed the boundaries of the old world. So who was he? A genius? A dreamer? A tyrant? Everyone will have their own answer, but one thing is certain. Columbus was the man who dared to believe in the impossible and made it part of history.